Welcome to this episode of Monopoly in Real Life. This one I want to talk about a touchy subject. The touchy subject is how to deal with the home and the mortgage as you're going through a divorce. It's a tough subject to have because you've got so many other emotions typically wrapped up in what you're going through with the divorce that the last thing you really want to dig into is how is this mortgage going to impact us in the future. And I'm going to talk about us. What I mean by that is the house spouse, or the spouse who's getting the house, who is going to stay in the house, or the out spouse is the one who's moving and moving out of the house, right? Both parties need to understand what's going on with the home loan and the disposition of property. Now, attorneys are great at what they do, judges are great at what they do, but they don't always know the nuances of the mortgage process and how it's going to impact you today, tomorrow, and into the future. And I'll give you a couple stories, if you will, some highlights that I've got to deal with in the past, and actually what I'm dealing with right now, which brings this episode to the top of mind. Okay, the last thing you want to do is have to relitigate your divorce years from now because things happen with the mortgage. You also don't want to pay the price when whoever was responsible for the mortgage stopped paying and you were out of the loop, and all of a sudden you're still in the liability, and now you go to buy your new home and you've got 3 mortgage rates on there that you didn't know about. So how does this work? All right, house spouse gets awarded the house, out spouse is moving out. Out spouse is still on the mortgage. Just because house spouse got the property doesn't mean out spouse isn't still liable. All right, these are crucial things to consider as you're going through a divorce. Judges do certain things like, well, the house spouse has to refinance it. Well, what if during this process the house spouse can't qualify? Where do you go from here? Where does the conversation go? There's a lot of things tied up in this. So you always want to make sure as you're going through this process that whatever's being decided can actually come to fruition. This is why I went out and I got a designation as a divorce collaboration expert, or professional, if you will, to help both sides navigate what it means to come to that settlement agreement to make sure that it's going to work for both parties in the future. Some of the things to think about. If the house spouse is depending on out spousal support to make this happen, well, there's guidelines we have to deal with. They don't happen overnight. So you can't have a judge who says, okay, you got 30 days to get the refinance done. Not going to work. The out spouse moves out, house spouse has it, and they say, well, we'll just keep it the way it is, but house spouse is going to make the payments. Out spouse isn't part of the mailer that goes out when the payment's late. Out spouse isn't in the loop when they make the call to say, are you going to make your payment this month? This is another thing that I find crucial in that conversation as you move forward is if this is the situation you're going to create where house spouse is staying in and they're going to make the payment, out spouse is still in the liability, I would make sure the out spouse is part of the communication with the mortgage company. Meaning, you want to know if that payment's 5 days late. Because when that payment is 30 days late, that now impacts you and your ability to buy in the future. Other thing, out spouse is out, it's 16 months later, they want to go buy a home, not remembering that they're still on this loan that the house spouse is on. House spouse is still in there, house spouse has been making the payments. What you want to do is set up a track record where house spouse has a proven record of 12 months of making the payment. So now that you can then remove that liability as far as a debt-to-income number when you go buy your next home or want to go shopping. Really think about this stuff. You do not want to be relitigating your divorce 5 years from now if you're going through a divorce right now. Take the time to meet with a mortgage professional, just as important as meeting with your attorney. Okay? You don't want to have to deal with this stuff in the future. You don't want to have to relitigate the mortgage when something else goes sideways into the future. I've got all kinds of nightmare stories, like simple one, like house spouse stayed in, house spouse wasn't on the mortgage, out spouse is still on the mortgage, house spouse stopped making payments. Outspouse didn't realize it, basically can't get a mortgage for another 18 months. Simple things like that. And then, here's a great one. Outspouse quick claims their interest in the house. Now they have no interest in the house, but they still have all the liability. Where do you go from here? So again, these are things that are important. Like I said, just as important to talk to a mortgage professional as it is to talk to your attorney. Can't stress it enough. Anyway, I hope this sheds a little light, at least makes you think a little bit, because as you're going through a divorce, this is the time to really dial in what this means. Can the house spouse really qualify? Number one. Number two, does it make more sense just to sell it and start over, and everybody's got a clean start? If there's kids involved, usually that's not the highest and best opportunity for both parties. It's not what comes to top of mind. But again, it's got to be part of the conversation. As a divorce collaborator myself, I'm here to work with both parties to figure out what makes the most sense for both parties. I don't have a dog in the fight, right? So it's really about what makes the most sense and really kind of spelling out the highlights of what can go right and what can go wrong as you look at your divorce particularly. So as you're thinking about property settlement and you're working with your attorney, give me a call. Let's at least have a conversation so that I can highlight some of the things that I've got to witness that might help you navigate that process. So, hope you enjoyed this episode. Nobody wants to talk about divorce, but it's an important conversation to have. You know where to reach me. See you in the next episode.